Okay, let's get started. Very cold, wet, rainy day today in Melbourne. I'll just begin with a short acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting. We're all on different lands, so I won't list them, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present. So today, joining us in the panellists, I'll just introduce myself to start with. Seem to have lost Craig Morgan, but so Hamish McGovern, I'm the Managing Director at Northmore Gordon. Welcome to all of you. I'll introduce next Sid Bansal. So Sid's also based in Melbourne with me. He's an expert in RECs and retirement. He's helped a lot of our large customers to many of their net zero goals or their decarbonisation targets through both offsets as well as some guidance on some of the direct action. Thanks, Sid. And joining us from Singapore, so Kelly's our account manager in Singapore. Works with a lot of solar developers as well as customers over there, and has a lot of knowledge about. Kelly's just attended the IREC Evident conference in Brazil, and so she's will have some insights, small insights maybe from that, which is great. So welcome, Kelly. Thanks for having you. And also in Singapore, Craig's joining us too. So Craig Morgan, Sales and Marketing Director and co-founder, my business partner. So without further ado, we'll jump into, we do want to get it a bit interactive, so certainly welcome people to put questions into the chat, and what we'll do is at the end of each session, so we've got the four of us speaking on slightly different topics. At the end of each session, we'll go through questions, and but definitely put questions into the chat. Really want to try and get some interaction. So without further ado, Sid, if you want to just bring up the deck, and we'll jump into it. I'll do a quick introduction on Northmore Gordon. I think a lot of you know who we are, but just for those that don't, I'll just run through very briefly. Look, we help, next slide, Sid. We help large energy users basically reduce energy consumption and reduce carbon emissions. Our purpose is to enable organisations to have a positive impact on the environment. So we're doing this through reducing energy, reducing carbon emissions. So most of us are very keen on that mission. Next slide, thanks, Sid. Just a really quick background. So we've been around for 15 years now. More than 6 million certificates created, and through registering certificates, which obviously RECs is one of the certificates we'll be talking about today, but RECs and carbon certificates, other certificates, 150 million in value created to customers. We've also dealt in a lot more certificates than that. We hold an AFSL, which is useful for trading carbon. We hold registry accounts around the world, and we work with a number of the registry bodies to ensure we can register projects and understand the methods and requirements. We're also specialists in measurement verification and leaders in a number of those methods under certificate creation. Next slide, please, Sid. I'll also mention that a big part of our business is around energy audits, feasibility studies, understanding how energy is used in large industrial sites in food and beverage, so that we can really help do those carbon emission reductions, carbon pathways, NGAS reporting, and scope 1, 2, 3 emission reporting. And then on the strategy side, helping businesses understand how they might procure energy as well, in line with their goals. Next slide, please, Sid. So now I'm going to hand over to Sid, and he'll run through just an overview of the RECs, and then we'll take questions at the end of his session. Thanks, Sid.
Thank you so much, Hamish. Thank you so much for introducing Northmore Gordon. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to explore what are environmental attribute certificates and what are RECs. Starting off, thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for taking out the time. What are EACs? They have been a challenge in understanding for quite a while, so I'm going to shed as much light as I can. What EACs do is it decouples the environmental benefits of renewable energy generation or carbon reduction from the actual physical activity. It allows for separately trading those and supporting the growth of renewable energy infrastructure. These certificates verify the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and promote investment in clean energy. By purchasing these certificates, organizations can meet sustainability goals and support the transition to a low carbon economy. As you can see here, firstly, we have RECs, or what we call here in Australia, LGCs. Internationally, they might have different names across different registries. For Taiwan, they have TRECs. For Japan, we have J credits. But the basic utility representing 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy stays the same. Down right, we have carbon offsets, energy efficiency certificates, guarantee of origins, which have different uses across different registries and frameworks. Moving on, what are RECs? Why are we having this webinar? Why are we educating our customers? What are RECs? RECs represent the environmental attribute of electricity generated from renewable sources such as solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal. They serve as a valuable tool to track production and consumption of clean energy. RECs can be used to make renewable energy claim and reduce your scope 2 emission reduction. Attributes which are generally seen with RECs is technology behind it, whether it's coming from solar, wind, or hydro. What is the generation date of the actual electricity and what is the vintage? Some of the countries have an overlap between these two. For example, in the IREC or evident registry, which and generation date are same. Whereas here in Australia, generation can be 2022 or whatever the year is of the generation. Whereas when we actually create the REC, it might carry a different year. Commissioning of device typically if we follow renewable RE100 or different guidelines, we want to invest in newer technology and support newer development. Hence why the typical what we want in terms of commissioning of device is around 10 years. RE100 allows for 15 years. Region, what market or country the energy was generated in. If you want to buy RECs, let's assume in China, and you cannot claim consumption reduction here in Australia because where you actually did the emission is different from what we claimed. So it is considered a best practice if we match those two. Grid connection is also important. An excellent example is Europe, where a lot of these countries share the same grid. Hence, they are considered a single market boundary for RECs or guarantees of origins back there. Timestamping, it is an emerging technology where the consumption would be matched hourly to the RECs. It would carry the generation time, hourly generation time, or when it was generated, which can be matched to your consumption. Just as an oversight how big the REC market is, the market size of RECs here in Australia is set out to be $4.5 billion. In Singapore, it is $0.15 billion, and the global estimate is $13.7 billion, which I believe, Hamish, is not enough to meet our target of 2030 or net zero 2050.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, probably I think that the global estimate is probably low given the Australian estimates. As we know, the Australian market's as big as that. Obviously, Australia's got a regulated market. But you're right. We're seeing great growth, and we know we need more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, any questions from anyone? More than happy to take it on now. But just remember,
there is one question, Sid. It's for REC registration. So let's assume registering a REC after a power station's already commissioned. Is there any limit on time frame? So let's say, could you register generation from 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
So depending on the local registry, they have different regulations. For example, if you have here in Australia, we have different years. We cannot go back. So for example, if I were to register my system right now, it will start registering from the day I actually register that system. It is not allowed to go back. Whereas if we were to compare the IREC registry, we are allowed to go back a certain amount of time. So under evident, the May cutoff, we can go back the past year up until January, which is not doable here in Australia under the Clean Energy Regulator Registry.
So not very far, I think.
Not very far, definitely. But depending on the country, depending on local regulations, it might have effects on that. I hope that answers your question, Hardy. Any other questions from anyone?
And just that commissioning of device in the last 10 years is typical, not least. I just that last. So within.
So another really good point here: commissioning of device. Hydropower plants, they are much older than typical solar installations and wind installations, but it doesn't mean that they are not good or they're any less, depending on your preference, depending on the criteria you're reporting to. Generally, it is under best practice to go within 15 years to 10 years is the best practice. So RECs represent the environmental attributes of electricity generated from renewable resources, like we discussed, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal. The prices vary from 0.6 USD to 220 USD, which is a massive difference in terms of scales. For example, the 0.6 here refers to a Chinese REC selling for around 0.65 USD in the market, representing 1 megawatt hour. Whereas if we go the upper end, the 220 is typically from Taiwan, which has a couple of constraints, regulatory constraints. The actual landmass of the country is comparatively smaller, hence the scarcity drives the price really up. REX has to be surrendered to claim the usage of renewable energy. The process, the flow, as you can see here, starts from the project owner of the renewable project registers their project with a local or an international registry. The RECs are then generated from this registration, which are then purchased by traders and suppliers. End users purchases those RECs from brokers or sometimes their electricity providers as well. Then the end user retires those RECs to claim a reduction in their emission reporting against Scope 2. After you've retired all of these certificates, you can claim that you have used 100% renewable energy bundled with those RECs plus the electricity. You can make 100% renewable energy claim under Scope 2. Location is preferred within the boundary the emissions took place, as it is considered best practice. Any questions from that here? Which countries are Australian companies allowed to use REC from? That's a really excellent question, Raj. Unfortunately, you can use RECs from other countries, but it is not considered a best practice. Since you're consuming electricity here in Australia, it would not be a best practice to offset your electricity in some other country. I hope that answers your question. So there is no set of countries where Australian companies are allowed to use RECs from. But
Sorry, just to clarify there, what you're talking about is what RECs could an Australian company purchase? Which countries could they purchase in respect of their Australian energy or electricity consumption? An Australian company can buy RECs from anywhere through someone like us for their international. I guess just international RECs. However, if you're going to make an end user claim to use RECs for in respect of your electricity consumption in Australia, best practice indicates you should buy that from within the market that you're operating in.
Yes.
Having said that, a good example, I'm in Singapore at my apartment. I purchased the green power option through the electricity retailer, and then they buy RECs from Vietnam because they're cheaper than the Singapore RECs. There's actually no restriction for you to do that. There's no legal restriction. It's not best practice, and you probably wouldn't meet, let's say, the criteria of RE100 or another carbon setting mechanism. You wouldn't meet the requirements of SBTI, Science Based Targets Initiative, if you did that. But there's nothing stopping an energy retailer offering that. There's nothing stopping a company doing that legally. It's just not best practice.
Hi, Clarin. Thank you so much for joining. More than happy to answer your question. If you want to ask your question, more than happy to answer it publicly as well, whatever suits you. Moving on, just shedding a little bit of light on scope of emissions and sources. Some of the people in this room might be across what are the three scopes, just shedding a really quick light on all three of those. Scope 1 covers emissions that a company makes directly. For example, when you're running a boiler in your factory, when you're running your vehicles for transportation. It can be a stationary combustion. Factory might burn coal in a boiler to create steam for its operations, or a mobile combustion produced by vehicles for transportation. Moving on, Scope 2, which is we use RECs for. These are indirect emissions from the creation of electricity, steam, or heat recooling, which are not produced by the company's own facilities. This is something that you buy from a power plant. Scope 3 emissions are all the other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain. It can be broadly divided into two, upstream and downstream. Upstream emissions come from sources that are related to a company's activity, which are not directly owned or operated by the company. This includes emissions from a company's business travel or an employee commuting. Whereas downstream result from a company's use of products or services, such as from a leasing company or using assets which are leased. For Scope 1, you can use carbon offsets, as you can see. Scope 2, RECs and carbon offsets both can be used. But a little side note here would be for carbon offsets. Vera does not allow registering renewable energy projects from 2021 for non-least developed countries. So you wouldn't see any more renewable energy projects from Vera. Some people might be across that. Scope 3, carbon offsets can be used. Any questions there? Unfortunately, the STCs slipped in there. STCs are not RECs, hence cannot be consumed to reduce your scope 2. Any questions from you? Why are RECs used for scope 2? Higher integrity. RECs are verified with their unique serial number, ensuring renewable energy that you purchase is credible and accurately accounted for. This builds trust and transparency in your sustainability efforts. Cost-effective OPEX, no capital required. RECs are an operational expense, not a capital investment. This makes them an affordable option for companies looking to meet their renewable energy goals without the need for large upfront investments. They are faster to deploy. Compared to building new renewable energy projects, RECs can be quickly integrated into sustainability strategy, allowing for immediate impact on your carbon footprint. Recently, we saw another financial institution who has operations for more than 30 countries. It would be a very huge pain to go physically into each one of those countries and start building solar systems. Hence why they are much faster to deploy. Widely applicable. RECs are recognized by major initiatives like SBTi and RE100, making them a versatile tool for companies committed to ambitious climate goals. Emerging 24/7 timestamped RECs. This is something really beneficial for data centers. These RECs match hourly consumption, providing more accurate and granular approach to tracking and offsetting your energy use, aligning with the latest trends in renewable energy operating. So all this talk that we have around AI, they are obviously supported by data centers who are massive emitters. How do we make sure that the consumption is met? By timestamped RECs, though that's the answer. Geographically aligned. Purchasing RECs from regions where your operations are located enhances the relevance and impact of a renewable energy use, supporting local renewable energy markets, contributing to regional sustainability. Back to you, Craig, when you said your electricity provider gives you green power but retires Vietnamese RECs. Do you think that's making the difference in your apartment? Somewhere yes, but somewhere in Vietnam, probably not in Singapore.
Yes, correct. Making a big difference in Vietnam.
Right. Moving on, there are different carbon reduction levers which can be used, split between capital expenditure and operational expenditure, and also divided amongst net savings per ton of abatement plus the net cost per ton abatement. So direct emission reduction, this lever involves actions that reduce emissions at the source, such as energy efficiency measures and process improvements. It offers a higher net savings per ton of abatement, but often requires significant capital investment. On-site renewables, installing renewable energy systems like solar panels or wind turbines directly in your facilities reduces reliance on grid electricity. While this also entails substantial capital expenditure, it provides a long-term saving and energy independence from your local grid. So grid purchase renewables or RECs, this lever involves buying renewable energy from the grid or purchasing renewable energy certificates. It's much more flexible, faster to deploy option that operates as an operational expense rather than an immediate capital investment, making it an effective solution for reducing carbon footprint. Carbon offsets. Offsets allow companies to compensate for emissions by buying carbon offsets from projects that reduce and sequester carbon elsewhere. While they may have a cost-effective net savings compared to direct reductions, they're really crucial for balancing out emissions that are difficult to eliminate entirely. That being said, this is a permutation and combination of use. Just buying RECs or carbon offsets won't solve your solution as well. It would not drive your net zero strategy alone. It's better to use different methods, different levers, depending where are you on your net zero strategy. Direct emissions are definitely provide you a long-term solution, but they carry a huge cost as well. Any questions here? I believe we have 2 questions with us.
Answer or ask? Okay.
If we buy 100 RECs, does it mean our 100 megawatt electricity consumption emission factor would be zero? Emission factor? No, because emission factor is accounted after you have matched your consumption of electricity with RECs. So emission factor would not be zero.
It does depend on what you're reporting against, and what the rules are of the reporting system you're in. So, for example, in the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting System in Australia, you have to report both the emission factor of the electricity you're using, not considering any market-based purchases like RECs or power purchase agreements and things like that, and that's called location-based emissions. If you then go and buy RECs to match all of your consumption, then you can report separately emissions from your electricity use as zero under what's called market-based accounting. But the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is requiring, for the purposes of transparency, they recommend that companies report both. So both location-based prior to buying RECs and getting renewable energy through PPAs, and then also what the emissions are after taking into consideration these market-based purchases. So in the Australian system, you're an NGA reporter, you're obliged to report both. Irrespective of that, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is recommending you report both.
Thanks, Craig. I'll
Thank you
answer
so much,
the
Craig.
second question. So what can STCs be used for if not setting Scope 2 emissions? So STCs are a part of the Australian Renewable Energy target, and small technology certificates. They're primarily intended as an upfront incentive for people to do rooftop solar. So they're sold to the energy retailers to generate funding towards households doing rooftop solar. So they're really a financial incentive to do rooftop solar, and it's packaged up front with the entire sort of forward period created. So they're there's another question here. Are RECs received by renewable energy producers time-stamped?
No, they are not time-stamped by default. You have to have different methods to capture the time-stamping. I believe there are different APIs available that can be connected to the registry, which will record time-stamping against each REC.
Yeah, it's just the timestamping of RECs, and RECs as a timestamp product is only just emerging. So the registries are only now setting themselves up to be able to even capture the vast amounts of data required to have timestamp RECs in there. But it's kind of a request from people like data centers and others in the industry, because what they want to do is part of their commitment to renewable energy is to drive the development of renewable energy, not just in volume, but at different times of the day. So it's seen to be as, I guess, the people like the data centers and software companies are really driving the demand for timestamp REC. The registries are starting to now set themselves up to have it, and we're working with some companies who are actually developing solar batteries and biomass projects, and they will be producing timestamp RECs. So it's probably, you'll see it, the availability of those will emerge more and more over the next couple of years.
There's a quick question I'll answer. Are STCs similar to ESCIs? STCs are still a form of REC. They're just a very limited one. So they are a megawatt hour of renewable energy. New South Wales ESCIs are energy saving certificates. So they're both environmental certificates. They both provide incentives, but they do have different features and different uses, but they do both provide incentive to do activities.
Moving on, we have a MAC curve here for different methods of emission reduction. Without going into the details, as you can see, RECs fit right in the middle, creating a cost-effective option for reducing Scope 2 emissions. It's not as good as energy efficiency measures, reducing your carbon footprint further, but not as cost-effective as carbon offsets, which are readily available, but they carry a lot of risk, a lot of different things, whereas RECs balances best of both worlds and provides you a cost-effective option while reducing your Scope 2. Any questions here?
I think
there's a question here. Are the energy requirements for storing the time series data in the timestamp RECs factored in each certificate?
I think that's what Craig answered already, which is, or Sid did, around there being APIs, and not all registries yet have the ability to do timestamped RECs, and it's really an emerging piece. So happy to take that one offline in more detail.
That's correct, yeah. So handing it over to Craig Morgan, who would be discussing how RECs are treated by RE100 and SBTi.
Okay, so RE100, for those who don't know, has been established by the Climate Group, and it's really a target setting mechanism. So companies who wish to set a renewable energy purchase target can do so and have that target registered, I guess, with RE100. There's over 400 companies worldwide who have signed up to the RE100 program. They're setting their renewable targets and a 100% renewable target. Now, renewable electricity is really the focus. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but in fact, it represents the companies under that. The 400 companies represent 481 terawatt hours of electricity consumption. And because it contains some of the world's largest companies, that actually is larger than the consumption of France. And if it was a country, it would be the 10th largest country in the world. So it's quite a significant number of companies have registered under this program. And of that 480 terawatt hours of consumption, already those companies are purchasing 240 terawatt hours. So about 50% renewable energy or renewable electricity. You can see on the right-hand side the growth in both the number of members, or all of the number of members, the reported electricity consumption, and the share of electricity is growing as well. The bottom right-hand chart, you can see where that electricity is being used by sector. And what is interesting about this is that manufacturing does represent the largest single sector for electricity consumption, but one of the sort of mid-range or lower percentages of renewable energy. So that just means that some of the renewable electricity targets are set a bit further out for the manufacturing companies. So the manufacturing companies have signed on. Their 100% targets are a bit further down the road, whereas people in, say, for example, the apparel and the transport services area have probably a relatively low amount of electricity relative to their services. Finance institutions is another example, where their revenues and their profits are very high and their electricity consumption is low. It's easier for them to get to 100% renewables a lot quicker.
Just before you move on, Craig, I've got two questions. One is there's a lot of one's a statement. A lot of companies are aligning to RE100 because you need to be a very large company to actually sign up. So there's many others that are actually aligning. Is that correct?
Yeah. Many companies who aren't part of RE100 do have. We're finding a lot of our customers are signing up or committing to 100% renewable electricity, even if they're not part of RE100. That's right. So the demand for renewable electricity, and I'll talk on this slide how people can buy that renewable electricity and where RECs fit in. The demand for that is rising substantially in and outside the RE100 criteria, and I'll talk a bit about SBTi later on, and that's also driving uptake.
Okay.
Another thing, Greg, do you think it's a good guideline or a benchmark to follow for the companies which are not committed to RE100?
Yeah, I guess going back to one of your slide around the levers, buying renewable electricity is a really strong lever that people can pull when they're trying to decarbonise. And as we'll talk about a bit later about SBTi, it's the mitigation approach rather than the offset approach. So for a lot of companies that are setting themselves on a decarbonisation journey, they're finding a lot of, if they're publicly listed in particular, a lot of pressure on sustainability managers and company directors not to just buy offsets. It's seen to be a permission to pollute or a license to emit. And so taking the mitigation approach, which is reducing our emissions at the front end rather than the back end, means that people are starting to, and companies are starting to consider much more strongly the purchase of renewable electricity. And so how do you buy renewable electricity? So there are 5 recognised ways by RE100, which is sort of, I guess, the leading think tank around how people can buy and report renewable electricity. So first of all, self-generation from facilities owned by the company. So that's a rooftop solar, or if you're a manufacturing company with land, it could be a ground-mounted solar. Direct procurement. So these are contracts with renewable electricity generators, either a physical power purchase agreement or a financial power purchase agreement, which is where the physical facility might be located somewhere else on the grid, but you have a financial power purchase agreement and get the transfer of the environmental attributes across with the contracted electricity. Contracts with electricity suppliers. So these could be, for example, a green power product via your electricity provider. They exist in most parts of the world. And if you're doing that and they're buying electricity, green electricity on your behalf, or retiring the RECs on your behalf and giving you the green electricity, that's an eligible way to buy renewable electricity. If you're not doing any of that, but separately buying and retiring RECs, which is, then that's called an unbundled procurement of an energy attribute certificate or a REC. And that is a legitimate way to do that as well. And then passive procurement. So some grids have a very high percentage of renewables. There's two in the world, I think, that two grids in the world that claim more than 95% renewable generation. Say, for example, New Zealand's not quite there, but they're in the 80s, high 80s, like 87% because of hydropower and wind mainly. But in those instances, people are buying renewable energy passively. So this breakdown here just shows you how companies in the RE100 program, and the companies that are reporting, not everyone has reported in the RE100, how they're splitting up the procurement methods. So there's a bit of self-generation. There's probably an average of about 25%, say, PPAs, power purchase agreements, through green power sort of contracts with the retailer, maybe another 25%, and then quite a large proportion of unbundled certificates, and then a small portion of passive claims. So this comes, I guess, alluding to one of the earlier questions, can you buy RECs overseas for Australian consumption? There are guidelines in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol around what is a credible claim for renewable electricity, and for using, in this case, a renewable energy certificate. So the elements that make up a credible claim are things like information about the resource or the fuel. So it needs to be a renewable fuel. And by the way, I should add, not to open a can of worms here, that Google is a target around carbon-free electricity, and they're including nuclear in their eligible sources. So not everybody is limiting themselves to renewable electricity, but where, for example, nuclear is available, say places like Japan, and it's I guess available on a timestamp basis, then places like some companies are including that in their mix. A lot of other companies are excluding things like biomass and hydro, even though they are renewable, because of the potential controversy around either what the biomass source is or the hydropower. A serial ID, so every REC has a unique identification number. Every renewable electricity generator registered in sort of credible registries has a generator identification, a name and a location. And that's used to help ensure that the generators that you buy RECs from are located in the same market that you're claiming electricity use in. The market, just definition of a market, we'll just talk about that quickly. Obviously, Australia, with its ocean boundaries, is considered one market. In Europe, there are eligible countries within a common market. That's where they share laws, there's good connectivity and mutual recognition of certain attributes. In Singapore, for example, at the moment, Singapore's its own market. There's a very small interconnection to Malaysia, but that's not considered part of the same market. That might change over time, but right now that's the case. A credible claim would use RECs that are reasonably close to when the electricity is consumed. So if I'm claiming I'm buying RECs for, let's say, the last calendar year, 2023, I don't want to buy RECs that were generated in 2014. I want to buy RECs that are reasonably close, so within a couple of years, to match when my consumption happened. And a recent introduction into the RE100 criteria is that the production device or the generator shouldn't be more than 15 years old. So you can actually buy an IREC in Australia from old hydro, but all those old hydro systems were built literally last century. And the generation date of the megawatt hour is sometimes different than when the actual REC was issued. It might trail the generation by a few months. So they're all the things that need to be transparently reported in a credible claim.
Hey, Greg, we have an interesting question in the chat, which I believe is one of your favorite questions. Can biogas be converted to and traded?
As Sid indicated, I'm a biomass fan. I think biomass in the right application has a lot of attributes, and biogas can as well. In Australia, actually, we'll start in Denmark. In Denmark and Germany, there's a lot of renewable gas coming from anaerobic digesters using farm waste and food waste and organics and things like that. It's producing a renewable gas and put into the gas pipelines. That is transferred to buyers on the same grid using a guarantee of origin. It's like a REC. It's an environmental attribute certificate, but it's called a guarantee of origin. Australia's just starting this. So there's one major renewable gas generator that is injecting into the gas grid in Australia, and that's the Sydney Water Malabar wastewater treatment plant. It's something like renewable gas is something like 30% of the Danish and the German gas grids. So that's one way that renewable gas has an attribute that can go to an end user that could be used for in this case, a Scope 1 emission reduction. The other way biogas can be converted into a REC is if it's put into a generator. So the Yarra Valley Water anaerobic digestion system, where they're taking in food waste, diverting it from landfill, goes into a biogas, goes into electricity. That electricity goes into the grid, and then that can be, you could create a REC from that and sell it if Yarra Valley Water didn't want to use that themselves. This is two ways. Biogas can go different pathways, direct into the grid or via a generator, in which case it would be renewable electricity certificate as opposed to renewable gas certificate. It's a little bit complicated, but both can be created. Unbundled attributes can definitely be created and traded.
I think you've been moved on, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely.
As said,
that's all right.
Well, Craig.
No, move me on. No, we're ready to go. Absolutely. So the Science-Based Target Initiative is gaining a lot of traction. There's a huge number of a huge number of companies now signing up to this target, and their approach is that a company should mitigate its own emissions before using offsets. And they're limiting offsets to less than 10% of a company's emissions and limiting the type of offsets can be used to just very, very high quality certain types. So a way to mitigate the company's emissions before using offsets is to use unbundled RECs via virtual power purchase agreements or things like that. And they're an acceptable method to reduce Scope 2 emissions. The same criteria apply. Buy them and use them in the same market. They refer to the RE100 technical criteria, which also refers to the quality criteria in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So the three of those mechanisms are all really using the same quality criteria, but they're an eligible instrument to use to reduce Scope 2 emissions for SBTI companies.
Greg, I'd like to ask a question myself. This is a question that I believe a lot of people attending this webinar would have. What happens if there is no availability of RECs in certain region? Are there any guidelines in RE100 or SBTI to use out-of-market RECs?
Yeah, well, there's two reasons why a company might not buy RECs for a certain operation in a part of the world. One is lack of availability. The other is very, very expensive. So only in the last sort of 12 months, 24 months, did we discover that Ireland's RECs are getting all purchased by data centers, and there's very little around for anyone else to buy. And data centers in Ireland are something like 20% of the total electricity grid. So it's a really interesting market dynamic. As an alternative scenario, Sid's already mentioned Taiwan, Korea, Singapore all have quite highly priced RECs. And if you're a data center or a big user operating in those regions with a very big renewable electricity target, it can be very expensive. So RE100 has a kind of a 15% rule, and there are certain exemptions from the strict criteria that you can utilize if it's less than 15% of your consumption. As a broad, there's some nuances around that, but that's as a broad, I guess, exemption. And of course, RE100 wants you to minimize that over time.
Right. So
this is just a brief slide showing some similarities between the shape of the curve of SBTI approved targets and IREC issuance, which is just one type of international REC. And that's just, I guess, illustrative of what's happening in the market at the moment.
Yeah, the growth, the fantastic growth.
And that's it for me.
Thanks, Craig. I think I'm on next. So I'm going to talk briefly about the Australian market and make some time for Kelly to hear about some of the market. So next slide, please, Sid. Look, I'll talk just very briefly. I mean, I think a lot of you are familiar with the renewable energy target. So this has been around since 2001. It reached a plateau in 2020 at 33 million certificates per annum, 33 million megawatt hours in terms of the government mandated target, which energy retailers have to buy. So And also the small technology certificates, that's varied each year, but that's currently sitting on a very similar number. These two combined make up that $4 billion market. So it is quite a significant impost on our electricity bills. Couple of things to note: the large scale investments are slowing because this target's been met 4 years ago, but the voluntary market has been picking up the slack. So you'll see down the bottom there that whilst the renewable target is a mandated one, the voluntary market of our customers and other businesses buying RECs and surrendering them, and government authorities buying them and surrendering them, is now over 8 million certificates per annum. So that's something to be aware of, and good news. Next slide, please. So in the Australian market, so LGCs and RECs, so RECs covering the international ones as well, because Australian customers will use them, as we talked about, for their international operations. But obviously we've got the renewable energy target, which comes to an end at the end of 2030. And you can see there an example of an electricity bill, the different environmental schemes. I haven't shown pricing, but basically you pay per megawatt hour of energy consumed. For SRECs is the SDCs, and LRECs are the LGCs. Apologies if that's a bit slow. Some large corporates actually buy LGCs directly and supply them to their retailers to reduce the margin put on by the retailers, or to manage the price risk as well. And then obviously we've got the voluntary surrenders. So businesses who have become climate active, carbon neutral certified, they can use LGCs to offset their scope 2 emissions. So that's one source of business surrenders that we're seeing. SBTI, Craig's just talked about. RE100, Craig's talked about. Green power is another one, which has been around also for a long time, and that is either in the form of bundled into an energy retailer's offering for green power, or you can actually buy unbundled green power LGCs. A subset of the LGCs are marked with some slightly different criteria as green power LGCs, and you can surrender those and then show you're using 100% green power or a percentage of green power. Another big demand for RECs in Australia, or specifically LGCs, have been the state governments and state authorities. So, for instance, Victorian government's got pledges to reach 100% renewable. A few years ago, they came out with the 100% solar-powered trams, and so that's all they're buying LGCs to meet all the demand. They're buying LGCs from some very specific solar farms, but they're buying LGCs to meet that demand. Likewise, the Victorian water authorities have got to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2025 in their statement of obligation emissions reduction, and they too are buying LGCs and a combination of on-site renewables. A lot of them use hydro, they're mini hydro as well. And then finally, we spoke about, I suppose, Australian operations who are surrendering LGCs here and then purchasing IRECs or other RECs for their international sites. Any questions on that one? Oh, well, let's keep moving. Actually, we can queue up some questions, but I'll keep moving.
Right. So are there any questions?
No, that's okay. So look, we are seeing a lot of voluntary action for especially renewable energy, and moving to it quickly for all those reasons that we've talked about, in that it is it's high integrity, it's measured. You can have very high degree of confidence in surrendering RECs that you're, especially within the same market, that you're driving the uptake of renewables. And so we're seeing lots of the banks, data centers, telcos, seeing near term, or at least by 2030, to hit 100% renewable energy. So Westpac. So that's great to see. But we'll keep moving. So I've just got one more slide on the Australian market before we jump to the international market and make more time for that. So something to be aware of is that obviously the grids everywhere are greening. This is a diagram of the national energy market, and showing that the grid emission factor, so the conversion of megawatt hours to tonnes of CO2, is dropping. So the grid is getting greener because of the penetration of renewable, because of the renewable energy target. What this means is, as Craig was talking about with market-based versus location-based, you can achieve 100% renewable by, you do need to do calculations, how much grid energy you're using, what's a local grid, what's the grid emission factor, and then acquiring RECs based on that grid emission factor. So there is some work to do to calculate in each location how many RECs need to be purchased, and also to examine rules eligibility to make sure you're doing it if you're conforming to something like RE100 or SBTI. Interestingly, there is a small number of IRECs in Australia that are being issued, that they can be issued instead of LGCs, and there's some that were done for hydro before actually LGC, the REC was around. I'll just touch very briefly on the Guarantee of Origin scheme. So that's in the process of being set up. Craig mentioned that's also there for renewable gas, and it's just started for renewable gas. The expectation is that this sits alongside, this is also being run by the Clean Energy Regulator, sits alongside the renewable energy target, and will effectively is expected to become the mechanism for voluntary surrender after 2030. So that's emerging now. The renewable electricity guarantee of origin certificates, regos. I don't think anyone's registered them yet. I think everyone's still using LGC at this stage. All right. So any quick questions on the Australian landscape before we move on to Kelly in Singapore? Okay, we'll move on to Kelly, because I think everyone's pretty keen to hear about some of the international stuff. So we'll jump to you, Kelly. So thanks very much.
Thank you. So before diving into the specifics of the Asian REC market, we will examine some compounding data from RE100. Next page, please. That underscores the importance of the renewable energy demand in Asia. So for RE100 companies currently account for 23% of Asia's renewable energy consumption. Additionally, RE100's annual energy footprint has increased by over 100 terawatt hours, with 72 terawatt hours resulting from new memberships. Just consumers within RE100 are based in Asia, with 7 in Korea and 3 in Japan. This rapid adoption of renewable energy by RE100 companies highlights the market's importance. Considering the crucial role of unbundled EACs in Asia's renewable energy landscape, let's now explore the types of EACs available to voluntary consumers. Next page, please. So in this slide, we can see the different types of REC in the market for voluntary participants. Certain countries have its own specific types of EACs tailored to their unique regulatory frameworks and regional consideration. Next. So now let's delve into the factors influencing the EAC prices in Asia, focusing on key points that drive the market dynamics, corporate initiatives alignments, and regulatory impacts. So to begin with, market dynamics play a crucial role. The renewable energy market operates on supply and demand principles, directly impacting the availability of RECs, essential for companies to meet their sustainability goals. So for the voluntary reporting standards and frameworks, companies are increasingly adopting initiatives such as RE100, SBTI, and CDP. The availability of RECs meeting specific reporting framework requirements and compliance with initiatives like RE100, 15-year COD specifications are critical for corporate sustainability. The national schemes, local supply regulations, and interventions of REC is another critical factor. As of now, international standards like RE100 regards Asia market boundary as country-specific, requiring corporates to match the country of consumption with the country of generation. Regulatory environments such as the RPS in Philippines have led to the deregistration of projects from voluntary REC market. So now let's consider the technology and transaction dynamics. REC prices vary depending on the technology type. For instance, hydro is a lot more cost-effective than solar or wind energy. Transaction volumes also play a role, with smaller volumes often commanding way higher prices, up to 4 times or more. So vintages, contract challenges are also significant. Long-term REC contract face challenges in price discovery. Additionally, crucial for the vintage of RECs to align with reasonably close to their consumption date. So finally, it's the supply shortages and pricing have a substantial impact. So for shortages in REC supply would lead to high pricing, just like in the Singapore market and the Taiwan market. Okay, we can move to the next slide now. Thank you. So let's now examine some of the key market challenges in Asia, starting with recent developments in China. A significant policy update was released by the China's National Development and Reform Commission, Ministry of Finance and NEA last August. So in 2023 August, This update introduced the Green Electricity Certificate, also known as GEC, as the exclusive instrument for verifying renewable energy attributes in China. And in 2024 April this year, the NEA released another draft that emphasized the GEC's role as the only proof of environmental attributes for renewable energy consumption in China, and is the only voucher that recognizes the production and consumption. On top of that, the seller shall also undertake to only apply for GEC and not to apply repeatedly for other credentials with the same attribute in the power sector. So in response to this, the IREC Foundation have expressed respect for China's sovereignty and acknowledged the possibility of exiting the China market in the future. However, as of now, China IRECs are still largely being retired by consumers, with 28 million redeemed by May this year. Shifting our focus to Singapore, the Energy Market Authority aims to import up to 4.2 gigawatt of low-carbon electricity by 2035, comprising about 30% of the nation's electricity supply. Recent agreements have facilitated the import of 100 megawatt of hydropower through regional interconnections. Singapore REC supplies have always been challenging for buyers due to the limited land for solar projects. So in acknowledgement of these challenges, Singapore have implemented the Singapore Standard 673 in 2021. This standard allows companies to purchase RECs from neighboring countries where physical electrons flow into Singapore. However, for companies looking to ensure compliance with international standards such as RE100, companies still have to adhere to the country market boundary. There have been ongoing talks about potentially treating Southeast Asia as a single market. However, this is contingent upon achieving regulatory consistency, physical deliverability, a recognized instrument for all generation attributes, and governmental agreements. In Malaysia, the solar REC market has seen significant developments as well, whereby the REC prices have doubled, largely by substantial purchases from the technological sector. Next slide, please. So let's now explore the dynamics of RECs in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, each facing unique challenges. Japan stands out with its strong demand for RECs driven by corporate participations in initiatives like RE100. Despite Japan's ambitious goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, its 2030 renewable energy target remains modest at 38%, with coal still holding a significant 20% energy mix. As of 2019, renewables accounted for less than 8% of Japan's total final energy consumption. Nevertheless, Japan boasts the second largest number of RE100 members, advocating for enhanced governmental efforts to expedite the deployment of renewable electricity. Initiatives such as non-fossil fuels support this transition alongside robust commitments from corporate and local entities. So moving to Korea, despite its significant renewable energy potential, the country faces insufficient renewable energy supply due to complex permitting and siting, as well as limited grid flexibility. Moreover, the RPS obligators they have a lot more demand compared to the voluntary market. As for Taiwan, the green energy market operates under stringent trading rules, featuring a relatively high entry threshold. Transactions primarily rely on PPAs. The market faces challenges with limited access, availability, and high prices of RECs, making it a tough environment for corporate buyers. Next page, please. So procuring EACs involves several crucial considerations for organizations committed to supporting renewable energy and achieving sustainability goals. The first is that it's essential to verify and certify that the EACs are through recognized and credible standards. This ensures that the claimed renewable energy was genuinely generated and delivered. Secondly, is the understanding of the specific market and regional requirements where the EACs will be used is crucial. Aligning with EACs with your organization's renewable energy goals is equally important, as well as evaluating the cost effectiveness of purchasing EACs compared to other renewable energy procurement options, such as on-site generation, DPPA, which is direct power purchase agreement. Prices can fluctuate depending on the market demand, source availability, and regulatory factors. So managing risk associated with EAC procurement is another critical factor. This includes assessing the market volatility, the regulatory changes, potential reputational risk, as well as the clear contract should outline the terms for delivery, validity, as well as recourse in case of verification issues. So transparently documenting and reporting the procurement and retirement of EACs, like Greenhouse Gas Protocol, enhances credibility and accountability in sustainability reporting. By carefully considering these factors, organizations can effectively leverage EACs to achieve their sustainability targets. Thank you for your attention. Now I'll pass the time back to Craig to facilitate
We've got a question for you, Kelly. So from Hattie, we've got, do you have any information about the wreck situation in Indonesia?
Depends on what you like to know.
Well, I'll start with, is there much supply and is it highly congested or?
For wreck supply, the common technology types are solar and geothermal. So for geothermal, previously there was an issue which is already resolved now, whereby around 20 of the geothermal plants was put on hold for issuance because of some regulatory issues with the government. But now it's back to, I think it's back to retirement and usual issuance process now. Yeah.
It's primarily IREX, is it? Is that correct? Or is it?
Yes, that's IREX. So IREX, yeah, 24 projects.
I can also give a price indication. So for Indonesian IREX, solar is around $4, whereas small hydro is 1.45 USD as seen levels for vintage 2024.
All right. Well, that concludes the formal presentation. So thanks to all the speakers. Thanks for your questions. Just a little bit about us to tidy up. I guess the story is founded in Australia. With offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore, Newcastle, and regional office in the Philippines. But we're covering and supporting our clients purchase RECs globally, and specifically helping power stations register RECs across Asia Pacific. So thanks for your time. Any other final questions? We'll just open the floor up to some final questions and give it a few minutes.
Yeah. Oh no, leave it. Oh yeah, stop sharing. Look, I'd just like to, while people are thinking about questions, thank Danielle O'Reilly, who's our marketing manager, who put together the webinar and ran Zoom and sitting behind the screens here, helping make sure it all went smoothly. So thank you, Danielle. It's gone very well, I think. So
thanks, Danielle.
And if you would like a copy of the slides, then please send it. Email to Sid and he'll send them through. I think we've recorded the webinar, so I believe we'll make that live somewhere too.
We have
from Zane. So the question, I'll read out the question. Currently, LGCs are sitting around the $50 mark. How do we see the market tracking over the next few years up to 2030? Many predictions saying this will reduce the price. Look, I'll have a go at answering that. So, I mean, the forward curve for LGCs has always been and backward dated in financial speak. So, and the reason for this being is that there's continuing supply coming on with a market that's already been met. So new supply is just adding to oversupply. But on the flip side, you saw that the voluntary market is growing quite quickly. So one of the slides I showed had the voluntary market already at 8.7 million certificates versus the 33 million annual certificate price. So the growth of that, I guess, versus the continuing increase in things coming online. The other reason why it's getting harder to add new large-scale solar as well and large-scale systems without more storage because of all of the distributors' energy networks are being very slow in providing grid connections. So if you think more voluntary demand, then the price will go up. If you think more supply, then the price will go down.
This is not financial advice. It's basically increasing voluntary demand counteracted by the scheme coming to an end and getting replaced, the regulatory complexity of getting replaced with the renewable electricity guarantee of origin scheme. So it's a highly complex landscape, impossible to tell exactly.
I can answer the question, which is for RE100 businesses, are there any issues with using weak revenue to acquire LGCs? Does this constitute as double dipping? Absolutely not, because they both are different schemes and operated under different frameworks. Weeks is operated under VEU, Victorian Energy Efficiency Scheme, under which we register weeks. which are purely for financial benefit, they can be sold off, and separately LGCs could be purchased and retired to claim emission reduction.
Yeah, I think the point being that the energy retailers aren't claiming any energy reductions or renewable energy with VEECs. It's a financial incentive like the STCs.
That's correct.
It is a subtle and very important difference between a VEEC and LGC, and so and rightly, it's right that sustainability managers need to be careful about that. We can provide some more detailed advice on that.
Also,
there's a similar thing with STCs as well.
Yeah. Also, VEECs represent 1 ton of carbon, whereas LGCs represent 1 megawatt hour. Moving on, we have another question. Do you know if there is a time frame by which a new power plant or large-scale generation system needs to be registered after commissioning? If we commissioned a system in January 2023 and did not register the system, then can we do so now? Absolutely, we can. But the caveat here being we cannot go back until January 2023 to register LGCs, whereas from the date that we actually register the power plant, we can start generating LGCs.
And I think that's under IREX, you can go back a certain amount of time. So the answer is yes, you can still register unregistered systems, but you may not get all the generation.
For the past. Definitely not for the past for LGCs, but if it was IREX, we definitely can.
Okay, there's another question here. We've discovered that for our systems that is registered for LGCs, these have been generated but not surrendered for prior years. Can we retire these for altruistic purposes for prior year? To skip forward. Can we retire these for altruistic purposes for the prior years? Can we surrender LGCs for 2023? And in what time frame can it be done? I'll pass that. I've got some ideas on the answers, but I think I'll pass that question to Craig. You can answer that.
Yeah, sure. Once again, there's no law that says you can't retire all your old LGCs for today's consumption. You could. It doesn't align with the best practice guidance from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. For example, let's say calendar 23, you want to retire LGCs that were already sitting in your account for calendar 23. There's probably two parts to this answer. If you wanted to retire LGCs in respect to that consumption, you probably don't want to go back more than about 2 years, so 23 and 22 generation. If you wanted to retire all your old LGCs and not create value from those, I think there's obviously nothing stopping you doing that, and then they can't be unsold even for a small amount. They're probably getting less and less attractive, and the price and the value of those is probably declining the longer they stay in your.
That's great. And also if it aligns with your sustainability reporting as well, which month do you report your sustainability report, and you might be able to use last year's vintage as well if it matches your consumption. Moving on, we have the last question, which is what is the main driver for renewable generators selling LGCs? I think PPA customers would need the LGCs themselves. Curious about your thoughts on the availability of LGCs in Australia in short term and long term.
I'll have a go at answering that. So, the main driver for selling LGCs is to generate income. So, for those that are happy to make an investment in renewable energy, but really want to get the fastest payback, but aren't really worried about making claims about renewable energy, then they'll sell the LGCs. Obviously, the unbundling of it allows them to sell it to someone else to claim renewable energy. I think there is also some level of ignorance. So some people are selling LGCs without realising that they can no longer claim to be using renewable energy. So there's certainly, we've come across customers who are selling them and assume that they can still claim they're using renewable energy, which clearly they can't. Long-term availability, obviously after 2030 LGCs, the REC finishes, and so we think Regos will be the replacement. I mean, look, there's certainly plenty of ongoing solar installations, especially rooftop. The solar farms are still going, but harder to connect. I think that comes back to whether you think supply will come on faster than voluntary demand. But so they're the two sides of the equation.
Great. Awesome. Any other questions by anyone?
Look, thanks everyone again for your time. I think we'll finish up there. That's great. You've all been able to, as many of you have been able to stick around for quite a long session. I trust you found it useful, and look forward to chatting to you more about it at a later time. And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much.